Hello to the Missing Witches Coven and happy new moon. Happy Pride Month. Today we're celebrating by hearing from one of my absolute icons. I have to be honest, normally I try to keep interviews focused, but this was just me fangirling out. I spoke to one of the original founding members of legendary psychedelic late 60s drag troupe, the Cockettes, Fayette Hauser, who has worked with John Waters and Divine. If you know the song, You Make Me Feel Mighty Real by Sylvester. Sylvester was one of the Cockettes. So Fayette and I talked about her new book, The Cockettes, Acid, Drag, and Sexual Anarchy. Her work in wearable art, her work with Bette Midler, communal living, psychedelics, the occult and hippiedom, and so very much more. So please join me in welcoming one of my absolute idols, Fayette Hauser.
You aren't being a proper woman, therefore you must be a witch. You must be a witch.
Hi. This is going to take me a second. I apologize for wasting this minute of your time. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I mean, yeah, I'm more busy now than I was before the whole thing started. I mean, I was disappointed that I couldn't do my live events because I was so looking forward to it. You know, I had so many planned. We're still talking about there's a big one in the SF Public Library because there were two exhibitions planned. One was at the LGBT Center here, and the other one is in San Francisco in the Public Library in the Hormel Center. And then there was a big event in the Cockettes Auditorium, and it was supposed to be in May. And then we pushed it to June 17th, thinking that it would be okay. But now we've all been talking because there's a whole team. And we don't think that, you know, we're going to have to wait because the library's not open or anything. And they're not, even if they open a little bit, they're not going to have people gathering. So.
Not the kind of spectacle that you're used to putting on, for sure.
Yes, exactly. We were going to decorate there's a gallery there, and we were going to make it look like the Cockette house.
Oh, what a tragedy. Well, I hope that it's going to be rescheduled. That's what I just keep saying, like, nothing is canceled. Everything is saved for later.
That's right. Yeah.
Hopefully.
Long pause. The earth is a long pause.
But maybe there will be an element, I wanted to bring this up anyway, now seems like a good time, of mask making as wearable art. Do you foresee that as a future?
Yes. Here's my.
For those listeners who are listening, Fayette has made a little face on a mask out of sequins and buttons.
Art Deco gentleman.
So you're already getting into this aspect of wearable art as masks.
Oh my God, they're all decorating masks. Yeah, I've got, you know, they keep sending them to me. I've got so many, you know, really, my friends are fabric collectors. I have a lot of wearable artist friends, and my friend Gina has, she's collects fabric, and she has this beautiful bark cloth and linen from the 40s and 50s, and so she's making them, and she just can't make them fast enough. She's selling them out like crazy. Before she has an Etsy shop, and you know, they're going up on Etsy and boom, out the door because they're so cool looking.
They're so cool and so practical. So what do you think, I mean, that's a function of, what's the function of wearable art in, say, 1970?
Because the mainstream was so far, it was so far away. We were not connected. We never went to a department store. You know, Macy's did not exist for us. N'existe pas. Gone. You know, we never even watched, we didn't have a TV. There was nothing, you know, we were on a parallel world. We had our own world. So of course we had to all make our own clothes. Everybody had a sewing machine. Every commune house had a sewing machine. And there were different looks, you know, that came about. There was like the gypsy, there was the gypsy hippie look. And so there was the glam look. I mean, the glam thing came out of the glam look, you know. So that was our style of freak, was very high glam, very bright colors. You know, as the tribes evolved, like the early tribe was very nature, very organic, created the organic food movement and organic farming. And by the time we came along, we were sort of the second generation that came along in the late 60s. And 68 was kind of when that transition happened, because the early tribes, they all moved to the country and they created, like Peter Coyote had Olima, and it was a back to the earth. They only had cold water. I mean, you have no idea. They were like pioneers. It was but he loved the Cockettes. And we used to go see him at Olima because he was into the same things we were, except he was like digging in the dirt, you know. So they were very, and also the Wild West, Victoriana, and American Indian, all of that became very prominent in San Francisco. So people were into like buckskin vests and the fringe, of course, and leather and leather and lace, that kind of thing. And the girls had all long skirts. And so, but then when they were safely put away in the country, I remember one night I was at Winterland and I was totally Cockette out. And I ran into the people that I had met when I first got there that were part of the family dog, the Big Brother family. And one of them said, "Look at her." You know? And they were all, "Oh, you know, what happened to you?" You know, and this kind of thing. It was really great.
And what had happened to you? Can you describe this look that they were reacting to?
Well,
do you remember?
Yeah, well, when we all finally got together in the Cockette house, it was really, everything exploded. And then came out the feathers and the bright colors and everything, you know, like fuchsia tops. And then we went back to the fabric stores, and there was one fabric store in downtown that really sold like gorgeous stuff. And we would go in there all the time. And I had this one friend, his name was Gypsy Joey, and he had like a workout bag, they called it. So I would say, well, I think I'm going to go all pink and purple in this show. And so he would go in there and boost like all the pink feathers, and you know. For our listeners, boost means steal. But that was part of it. It was like an anarchy kind of. An anarchy, and we only did it from corporations, companies.
Of course. Not from, you know, the street. We didn't we didn't pick people's pockets. No, it was like very much like a Robin Hood kind of,
right.
Theatrical Robin Hood vibe.
Yeah, we picked the corporate pocket. Thank you very
much. Yeah. And I know that like different communes had different functions. Like there was like a food commune and a childcare commune, and like, if I recall correctly, a mechanics commune.
Yeah. Peter Minton, who was our piano player, they all had old cars. So they were constantly going to, you know, guys love cars and they all want to tinker. So that was the commune, the tinkering, you know, and motorcycles. God, that was huge. And so you would go there. And I mean, that commune still existed in early Burning Man. So they had a camp at Burning Man, right? Where you would take your bike. I mean, it's still
happening.
And I mean, what are you going to do? Of course. I mean, the food conspiracy was the best, though, because, the Cole Street Commune was the first to actually create a farm in Marin where they would farm. I mean, we didn't want anyone else to touch us. We wanted to have it all done by ourselves because we knew what was pure and fabulous, you know. So they went to Marin and organically, you know, created their own farm, and then they would bring the food into the city and distribute it. So then this other commune evolved, and they called themselves the Food Conspiracy, which was such a good name. And so we would give them, it was either you'd contribute yourself either $25 a week or food stamps. And they had 2 deliveries, and one would be all produce and one would be dairy, because of course it was vegetarian. So you would get eggs and milk and cheese. There was always like a lot of cheese and pasta. I just remember so much vegetarian lasagna all the time, you know. In the Cockette house, we had cooks. And of course we made our own bread. You know, that was a big thing in every commune, made their own bread. It was considered sacred that you made bread, kneading the bread. It was like a ritualistic thing, you know. And I think people make their own bread. I mean, look at now. How many loaves of bread and cakes and pies are you seeing on Instagram?
Mm-hmm. And yeast being sold out in grocery stores because people are returning to this.
Talking about his yeast thing and his sourdough, was showing his sourdough bubbling yeast thing. I mean, I am the opposite. I don't even want to touch the oven. I don't think my oven's been on in 10 years, really. But
can you talk a little bit more about that? That's like, as a viewer, that sacred process of bread making. Like, you didn't want to get your hands dirty, but what did it look like? I mean,
you know, my head was in a different place, but yeah, it was Nancy Gurley is the woman who taught me everything. You know, she was like, I met her in Colorado, and I had no intention of going to San Francisco because I thought it was over, because this was '68, the summer of '68, and I thought, well, the summer of love is over. I thought it was like an event. Well, that happened. So I'm going to go to Paris, you know, this kind of thing. And I had saved up $500, which was really good then. You know, travel was cheap and everybody was welcoming to young people. Oh, stay with us. You could do whatever you want. So, but then I met Nancy Gurley, and she tuned me in so much. I spent months with her. So by the end, it was almost like a crash course in the counterculture revolution at the time. You know, here's what's happening. And it was everyday stories, walking in the Rocky Mountains, and it was incredible. So when I got to San Francisco and I would visit her, she would make bread and she would tell me what a ritual it was I mean, they always hand-dyed fabric, you know. Everybody wanted cotton, you know. Now remember, polyester was happening then, you know what I mean?
Not the John Waters film, but the actual fabric, yes.
So this is like 60s, 70s, polyester was huge. I mean, now we can love it, but then we were like, NO, plastic fabric. So we were all about organic cotton and silk. And you could not find it. You couldn't find it really as far as garments were concerned, other than a t-shirt. And even t-shirts were not pure cotton. That was not happening at all. So we would find Victorian clothes, like Victorian blouses, and dye them. That's where the dyeing came in, because everything Victorian was either white or black. So, right? So these cotton peignoirs and knickers and blouses and all that kind of stuff. So her favorite color was old rose. So everything was old rose. So when you went into her place, all the tables were covered in these fabrics and laces, and she would have the dough rising with, you know, old rose lace covering the rising dough. And so it was her morning ritual, was to sweep the floor, because she did mushrooms with the Michoacan Mexican women, and that's who turned her on. And that's what they did. They got up and they swept the floor, and then they made the bread, you know. So that's what she did. But the bread, when you make your own bread, and besides, you know, in the store, again, there was no there was pumpernickel in the Jewish deli, but there was no whole grain bread at the time. Everything was white bread. I mean, your mom, you know, when you grew up, it was all white bread sandwiches.
Mm-hmm.
My brother loved it till the day he died because, you know, he loved his childhood. But, you know what I'm saying? But for us, it was, you know, we're making our own bread and we don't want that plastic bread.
Yeah,
So
it was like a resistance
yes,
measure.
that was,
Yeah.
it was really discarding everything that was not pure, actually, because when you took psychedelics, it was serious. You know, I mean, we had fun with it for sure, but a psychedelic trip was very serious. And you really saw clearly what was pure and what wasn't. So all those things came out because of that.
I, I,
Yeah.
I read somewhere that you said that there's a mysticism to tie-dye.
Oh, God, yes.
Can you talk about that?
Well, before the Cockettes, yeah, everyone was into I don't exactly know. That was happening even before I got there. And I'm not sure exactly where it emerged, but very early on, women that were making their clothes, people that were making clothes, not just women, but they were, the tie-dye was happening when I got there. But when Nikki and Harlow and I lived together, this was the house before the Cockette house. The kitchen had a great big cast iron thing on the stove, and that was the tie-dye bucket, and it was always going. And we would, I mean, it would start out, you know, you put some colors in, and you would start out with one thing that would be strong colors, and you would add water and keep it going until you got these pale pastel fabulous colors. I remember that I got this, it was a bias cut satin gown that was off-white, and Nikki tie-dyed it so that it was pale orange and pinks and purples, and I wore that to death. It was like my magical mystical dress, you know. And I mean, the importance of putting clothes on you that really met your soul was so important. You didn't put anything on you that wasn't meaningful. Not so much as, yeah, of course there were no bras, that was out the window. But anything that you put on had to have like a really, really significant meaning for you. You didn't wear anything that was not real for you and symbolic and expressive, because you were in such a intense state of mind that was so complete that you had to express it with your clothes, and everybody did that. So it was really, what a colorful parade. It was fabulous.
Your description of the bubbling cauldron of mixing dyes, I mean, that really does just sound like absolute witchcraft to me.
Yeah.
And did you talk about it in those terms back then? Like how much occult conversation was happening?
Oh, yes. Oh, God, yes. The family dog was deep into the occult, and they had their own magician named Martoon, and they were all from Detroit. The family dog was from Detroit. And so Martoon had long hair. It was kind of wiry, and he had a long mustache like that. He was very much the magician. He really looked the part. And he had a twang, I remember that, and he loved women, absolutely loved women. And he was also a painter. So some of the family dog lived in what we called the Russian Embassy, which is the house on Scott and Fulton. It's 1198 Fulton. And it's now owned by a friend of mine who's a Victorian preservationist, and it's so gorgeous. But at the time, you know, the Victorians, they were all unpainted. They were either peeling gray paint, peeling whitewash, or raw. I mean, the city looked so spooky because all the people wanted suburbia, just like my parents. It was suburbia, and they wanted the ranch house, and everything was painted white and primary colors, and, you know, modern, que moderno. It was thick of the mid-century. So people had abandoned the Victorians, and nobody wanted to live in them, and they were bulldozing them. But the hippies, they started squatting in them, or they were owned by people who didn't live there, and they were renting them really cheap to, you know. And so we would rent a whole flat for like $100. You know, it was nothing. So
this was divided between 15, 20 people.
5 people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, because Scrumbly built lofts. We had at least one loft in every room because they all had 12 to 18-foot ceilings. Oh no, the Victorians were fabulous. That's another reason why it happened in San Francisco, because the Victorians accommodated all these hippies with an alternate lifestyle, and they were not homeless. Hippies were not homeless. That's a misconception. They were not living on the street like there's now, you know.
Mm-hmm. But they were occupying these.
They occupied the Victorians and actually saved the Victorians, so that now it's like the pride of the city, the painted ladies and everything. So in the Russian embassy, which is one of the earliest, I think it's 1889 it was built, and Scott and Fulton is a peak. It's really the center of the city, because Fulton goes from City Hall to the beach. And it's a hill that goes up. It's a pretty steep hill. And when you come up Fulton, a lot of the bike riders, you can see them groaning up the hill, man. It's that steep. And so is Scott Street. So Scott and Fulton meet at this apex like that. And it has a tower. So it's 5 stories with a big tower at the top that had, at that time, a 365-degree view. And the tower was square, and it's a pretty big room. And the man who built it, he was a German importer of chocolate or something like that. But he also, yeah, right. He also had shipping. Now that's, you know, that's magic. I mean, chocolate, what else, you know? But he also had shipping interests. So he built the tower. He built the house on that spot and the tower so that he could see the bay. And he had a telescope and he could see the ships coming in and whether his ship had come in or not. And also Marconi, who developed, you know, the wireless, he did the first wireless transmission in San Francisco, in the West Coast, from the tower. So now it has historical, it has a plaque and all that kind of stuff. But it was privately owned by 2 different, he sold it, then another person. Then in 1928, these white Russian expatriates from the revolution bought it, like crazy, ex-military, really decadent people bought it. And Jimmy has a drawing, you know, that is a drawing of the house. And it says in very florid script, the Imperial Russian Embassy. But there was no Imperial Russia at the time anymore, of course. So everybody nicknamed it the Russian Embassy. And it had a nightclub. There's a ground floor that everybody calls it the ballroom. And that was a nightclub. And upstairs was the whorehouse, right? So that went on until well into the, I think through the 30s. And in the late 30s, it became a boarding house for jazz musicians. So, but in the 60s, it was kind of cut up into rooms by then, you know, walls added, that kind of thing. So, but in the early 60s, I think it was even in 62, it became one of the earliest communes in the city for this theater group called the Calliope Company. And then it just became like a rotating group of communes and different people. So when I got there in 68, the family dog was in there. And Martoon lived in the tower, right? Because he was the magician. There you go. Yeah. And I could understand why, because I mean, I've been in that house a lot because I always stay there now when I go there. And if you get high enough, you can definitely see the ghosts.
Yeah, I'm sure. Because there's a whole tarot deck that you're laying out here. You've got the tower, you've got the magician, surely.
The arcana is well represented there.
Right.
Yeah. And at the time he was doing, so the tower is very high and has a peaked roof that where inside the tower, you can see the inside of the roof. I mean, it's just fabulous still. I mean, now it's just gorgeous. So he did these paintings and they were in the corners. They were tall and narrow and they were the 7 deadly sins. And then he had a giant altar. So on the the top floor of the house, then there's a little staircase that goes up to the whole house was totally magical. And everybody had altars. I mean, the family dog was deep. They were really deep, and they were way into the magic. So he had a curtain, like a black satin curtain that had a white pentagram, but they were all into white magic. It was all about white magic. So he had a white pentagram, and to go up, you had to part the pentagram and go up the stairs. And then the first thing you saw was this gigantic altar that he had with, I mean, you know, they were collectors too. I mean, everybody that was into psychedelics was into symbology, iconography, objet, you know, so everybody was wildly collecting and making altars and vignettes and, you know, I mean, really, that was huge. And anybody who was born into that, was rebirthed into that still. I mean, you know, we all, mad collectors. So, but then there was no place to sit, there was only the bed. So the altar and then the bed. It was a huge bed, and you had to get on the bed. And that was, and so you lay on the bed, and then you had this view of the entire city. It was fabulous, So he would summon you, because I at that point, when I got to the city in '68, I was staying on Noe Street with two other people that were, one of them was the family dog dealer, you know, and her name was Paula, and then Patty Cakes. And so then, you know, Nancy said, here, this is where you're going to live, you know, so I moved in there. And so one night, Martoon, you know, send Fayette over. And so it's like, it's like, it's fabulous. Yeah, it was great.
That's amazing. And
such a fully functioning alternate society that was operating on a whole other level with a whole other set of societal, you know, situations and ways of living. It was divine, to say the least.
Divine, to say the least. And I mean, for me personally, I feel like psychedelics were like an important part of my journey, but I also hesitate to recommend psychedelics.
I think psychedelics is the only thing that's going to save us at this point.
Thank you. I'm going to let you recommend psychedelics. Can you get into that a little bit more?
Oh, yeah. No, once you really are rebirthed through psychedelics, you understand your position in the universe. You understand what your real job in the universe is, to expand the universe. Your responsibility is to expand the universe in a positive way. And everybody understood these things. And the more journeys, the psychedelic journeys, everything, it was a teaching lesson. So anybody, and we all did it, we did it together. We would either do it two together or a group of us, and we would plan it. I mean, it wasn't, you know, there were some people that were taking it every day. You weren't supposed to do that. I mean, and they kind of went off track. But most everybody would really, like, today we're going to have a trip and we're going to go to Mount Tam, and we planned it, you know, and we would have all the necessary things that you would need. You would need some tea, you know, you would need fruit, you know, these are the kind of things that you were drawn to eat. You didn't want to eat a hamburger, for God's sakes. No. So, yeah, I mean, my feeling is that psychedelics will replace the kind of rituals that we have now that have become meaningless. And I mean, I don't want to insult anyone, but things like confirmation, you know, in the Catholic religion, you have confirmation, and you have bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs, and, you know, I don't know what other, but those I think will be, I think this is the only possible future, because everybody needs like a jumpstart enlightenment here, you know?
Yeah, the coming of age ceremony will be done with psychedelics as well. Yeah,
psychedelics and have leaders, and you would prepare for it, and then that's how you initiate the child into a proper adulthood on Earth. You know, I mean, here you are. This is your universe. Now get into it. I'm
sorry, I just need to repeat that. This is your universe. So get into it. I want that on a t-shirt. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Carry on.
Well, yeah, that's what I see, because those kind of, they're just parties and giving kids money and all that kind of thing.
And I think that's kind of what psychedelics turned into too, just like parties and, you know, not the spiritual.
Yeah. Well, you know, the psychedelics were heavy, hot and heavy when the Cockettes first formed. So everybody that was in the core group of the Cockettes were all psychedelicized. Everybody in the group had been in San Francisco for at least a year. So we had all been rebirthed. So the Cockettes was like our second incarnation, you know, and as a group, we created our particular future vision, you know, that was glamorous and happy and fun and funny and expressive. You know what I mean? We had our own thing that was really solid. But then by the time it ended, psychedelics really had kind of gone out of style in a way. But I think it had to happen that way, because psychedelics really kind of, it was a neurological situation where people's nerves were just too frazzled, and, you know, people had taken as much as they could. And people that had really become rebirthed in a great way had either gone to the East, to Eastern religions, or had gone to the country, or had, you know, like we went into the theater space. And but people that came to San Francisco after that, they really got into more of the hard drugs. And, you know, so that was a shame that it really took that left turn.
Yeah.
Because it was, I think it would have expanded a lot more and expanded in a better way, even though individually people were writing books. Everybody was doing a serious creative project. So a lot of that carried on, but then the drugs took down a lot of people, which was really sad.
I mean, I when I think of Janis Joplin, I really think that she was doing her best Fayette Hauser in terms of her look.
Nancy Gurley dressed her completely, you know. Nancy Gurley was her godmother and mine as well, you know, and many others. She was like the Earth Mother early icon.
Is she still around? Has she written a book?
She passed. I wish, you know, I wish. And at the time when we were in Colorado, at the time I wished I had a tape recorder, because she had a PhD at an early age. You know, she was a child prodigy as far as her intellect was concerned. So, you know, I mean, when she spoke, it was so mind-blowing. And she would have been the one to write an incredible book. She was the first one that was into essential oils, and that's what she was into just before she died, was, you know, ritualizing essential oils. And there was a place in the Tenderloin called Nature's Herbs. And I mean, I think it's the same company that's still going, but it was a little store that sold these little brown bottles with all these different oils in them. And we would make a journey to Nature's Herbs and get our essential oils. And I still have some of the bottles, and they look like, you know, like old English, you know.
Apothecary.
Yeah, apothecary looking. It's just fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Victorians were into that too. You know, that was another reason, I think, why. And the whole metaphysical movement from the late 1800s, early 1900s was very much alive. There was a metaphysical bookstore in San Francisco that everybody went to, and it had a library. You could sit there and read. So it's really happening then. Yeah.
You mentioned the various spaces that were inhabited by the people that you associated with, be they farms or, in your case, the theater. But the Cockettes took what you were doing in the streets to the theater. This was not so much like you dressed up only on stage. I mean, surely
No. It was really important for people to be real. You know, that was, coming out of the 60s, and even now I see films that were made in the 60s, and it just reinforces what I even knew then. When I was growing up, people didn't talk about their feelings at all. People expressed themselves. People all had a facade, and you presented this cool facade, and you would, suggest or intimate things. Nobody said, "I love you" outright. Nobody said that. Nobody expressed, someone else positively, like, "You look so beautiful," or nobody would say anything like that. So, and I remember feeling that it was so false at the time. So that's one of the things when I got to San Francisco and people were real, they would say what they really meant, and you didn't have to do it like a translation in your head as to what the hell was really going on instead of this facade of stupidity. So that was kind of the dawn of that. And it was also the dawn of the self-awareness movement that came along, because people were trying to discover who they really were and not, who their parents thought they were. And, it was confusing growing up in the 60s, I'll tell you.
So what... I obviously have like a very highly romanticized view of, the Cockettes and the life of the Cockettes.
Yep, it was romantic.
But what was the reaction of like the straight people, for lack of a better word, when you were in the parks, or were there just like no straight people in San Francisco?
Yeah, right. You could say that. I mean, just about everybody that was living in San Francisco either had a child or a neighbor or somebody that was involved in it, even in the slightest way. So the third Cockette house, we lived across from the Panhandle. And so there's pictures of us on this bench in the Panhandle. And you can see these two black guys walking through the Panhandle, and they're looking at us and laughing, so, and yeah, I mean, the whole city was taken up with it. So it was very much like, Paris in the 20s, or even the way New York was. New York in the 60s was actually quite fabulous because it was design-wise and fashion-wise, it was really peaking. So you would see it on the street. You'd see fantastic fashion on the street. And that's the way it was in San Francisco, with this whole counterculture vibe. The whole, ethos of the movement was going on everywhere. I mean, it was thick in the air. You could cut it with a knife. Yeah.
So you found that when people were laughing, they were more laughing with you than at you. It wasn't like a mean-spirited.
No. And they're, people were making an effort to be positive and say positive things to actually grow that vibe, because people realized when you're positive, when you take a positive point of view, you create something instead of tearing it down. So that was really the vibe going on. And also there was hitchhiking. And here's the thing about hitchhiking. Because there was like businessmen, of course, and people like that, regular people. So you'd hitchhike maybe 2 at a time, and you'd get in the car and they would like, what? So then you take them to the Cockette house. So we were into initiating people into the lifestyle and into, raising their fashion sense or their hippie awareness, so yeah.
There is some
spreading the word all the time, man.
And there are some really great minds, like within the Cockettes, obviously, but also in terms of your collaborations. I was like Allen Ginsberg.
Allen Ginsberg loved the Cockettes. First of all, because we were all gorgeous. I mean, not to say, but
I mean, facts are facts.
Hibiscus show, I mean, it started in the house where we were living, but then afterwards, to increase the group, Hibiscus would go in the park, Harlow and Hibiscus would go in the park, and they would pick out like the prettiest hippies.
And if I'm not mistaken, you were like a child model. Is that correct?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
So ostensibly impossibly beautiful. No arguments will come. So Allen Ginsberg.
Yeah, so Allen Ginsberg loved the Cockette house because there were so many beautiful boys there. You know? So I remember Rumi lived at one time in Berkeley with some guys, some other gay guys, and they couldn't get Ginsberg out of the house.
That sounds exactly right to me. Yeah.
Alan, come on, are you going to pay rent or what?
And what about, how did you get involved with John Waters and Divine?
Oh, well, the theater where we played, the Palace Theater, was on the weekends. It was the Nocturnal Dream Show that Sebastian was running. And he was a cinephile, and he was showing films every weekend, and it started at midnight, and it was a Chinese movie theater at, it was at the end of North Beach, where North Beach and Chinatown, it was really near the bay. So it was very much a part of Chinatown too, but North Beach, very North Beach. And so I think Stephen Arnold had found the theater, and Sebastian was part of the Stephen Arnold group. And Stephen Arnold had made a film called Messages, and he showed it at the Palace. But then he went off to Hawaii, and Sebastian kept doing it. You know, they named it the Nocturnal Dream Show, and Sebastian made a deal with the manager of the theater. And I mean, you know, he was paying the manager of the theater, so it was fine with him. And Mr. Chu was totally inscrutable, you know. So it drew all the hippies after Winterland, you know, I mean, that would end and you would still be raging and you would want to go somewhere. So everybody went to the Nocturnal Dream Show because it was a real safe space. You would be in the theater, you could take more psychedelics. You know, it was a big old like vaudeville theater. It was beautiful, had a great proscenium stage, and it had a balcony. I mean, I forget how many, but it fit a lot of people. It was pretty big. And so the balcony was like, the sex fest upstairs. If you met somebody, you would go up to the balcony and have fun, you know. So everybody went. It was great. So, I mean, Hibiscus had found another theater to do it, but then that fell through, and that's a whole story. That's in the book. But because he wanted so much to do it on the New Year's Eve of 69-70, Link knew who he was also living. It was all Scrumbly's house, you know, where that was the core house, the original. And so Link knew Sebastian. And so he went to him because Hibiscus was absolutely, once his theater fell through, he was just upset and inconsolable because it was very close to, I mean, it was like a week before or something. So Link went to Sebastian and said, can we just jump on stage and do something? We want to announce our new effort. And Sebastian said, absolutely, no problem, because on special holidays, he would have live entertainment as well as the films. So, and he was actually looking for, he only recently, you know, he has a piece in the book, and I didn't even know this until he wrote that piece, was that he was actually looking for a group to perform at the theater, to do live performance. And so he was letting anybody perform to see if something would emerge. And
something did.
Something sure did.
Yeah.
So that happened on New Year's Eve. And when we came out on stage and did what we did, the roof blew off, you know, honestly. And none of us expected that. We were dumbfounded. And then Hibiscus, of course, put the record on again, you know, and we went crazy and the whole audience went nuts. And so there was no turning back, obviously. And so our whole lives turned around right then and there. There was nothing. That was clearly the God shot. This is your job. So keep going. You know, that was, we all got hit that night. The big bolt, you know.
God shot. I love that.
The God shot. It was great, man.
And so the theater owner had seen, I think it was Multiple Maniacs, and wanted to book Multiple Maniacs.
No, Sebastian. That's Sebastian.
Sebastian, yeah.
ran the Nocturnal Dream Show. The theater, I don't even know who owned this theater, but the theater manager and Sebastian had made a deal. So yeah, Sebastian was always looking for avant-garde films, and there was a lot. I mean, he would show the French New Wave along with silent films, and he showed everything. And so he was always looking for new films. And so he found Multiple Maniacs. And oh, we went crazy when we saw Multiple Maniacs. Are you kidding? That's the scene when they have the revival, when Mink is doing the revival and Divine comes in and shoots them all. Oh my God, we went nuts when we saw it.
I mean, I saw it for the first time in the 2000s, and it was still like, I can't even imagine what it would have been like to see it then.
I mean, there's no other film scene that can compare to that. I mean, no. What scene can compare to that in perfection?
Yeah.
Perfection, acting, everything. I mean, and who better but Divine? I mean, really. So then Sebastian went looking for John Waters, and he contacted him. So John came to San Francisco before Divine. So John came and he lived for a while in San Francisco. So we all knew John. And then it wasn't until 72, the spring of 72, that Divine came. But this is before Pink Flamingos, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Divine came, and I mean, there were other pockets of freak theater people. There was Tomato Duplanty had created the Whiz Kids in Seattle. He had been in early Cockettes shows. No, believe me, Hibiscus really was a shaman. And when he turned you on to your true self, your magical, fabulous self, it was forever, and he changed so many people's lives. He was so wonderful. You have no idea what a great person he was and what a genius. And
it's so iconic too that he happened to be caught in that moment of placing a flower into a gun barrel that became this iconic photo, and then unrecognizable as Hibiscus.
I know, and even that was even before he was Hibiscus.
Yeah.
But the thing with he had a destiny. There's no question about it.
No question.
And he was born into an extremely supportive and loving family, who they were like a regular family, and they lived in Florida, but he was a theater person. I mean, he was a reincarnated theater person from God knows when. You know what I mean? He used to say, "Theater is the blood in my veins."
Yeah.
You have no idea how melodramatic he was. I loved him. So he turned his whole family into a theater family, doing children's theater. I mean, they all were involved in the theater, and they had just been regular, you know what I mean? And he did that. And then Ellen Stewart started La Mama in the 60s, and somehow, I don't know how she knew them, but she brought them from Florida to New York to work at La Mama. So Hibiscus was working in an underground theater from early teenager, so he knew all about underground theater. And I did too, because I was always in Manhattan. When I was in high school, I was always going to Manhattan and looking for that stuff. So when he came to us and he explained what he wanted, I knew exactly what he was talking about. So, yeah.
Well, just going back to New York, did you work with Andy Warhol before you were a Cockette? Oh, plus. Like, what the hell, Fayette? You really, I mean,
well,
great.
Well, I don't know. My grandparents were artists. My grandmother was an opera singer at the Met, and my grandfather was he was a visual artist, and he was very successful. They were both really successful. And my father, he had the soul of an artist, and I probably would have been one if it hadn't have been for the Depression era, the war era, that kind of thing. So he was a businessman. But my brother went into music, and I was a painter, and my father was thrilled to death, absolutely thrilled. My brother had singing groups. He was into 4-part harmony, and he later, was the Manhattan Transfer, created Manhattan Transfer. So from high school.
Wait, what?
Oh yeah, my brother.
Your brother created Manhattan Transfer. Okay. I'll just add another one to the incredible tapestry here.
The family.
Yeah.
He had his first four-part harmony group in high school called the Criterions, and my dad was the manager. Then when he was in college, he had a trio like the Kingston Trio, like a folk trio. Then after that, he created there was a first incarnation of the Manhattan Transfer that was kind of a little all over the place. And that lasted, they had one record on Capitol, but then that disbanded, and Tim, honed the whole thing much better, and he took a few years to do it. So when we went to New York with the show, Tim was starting to form the Transfer, and he was at the show every night. And so he loved the Cockettes. And John Rothermill was a very early devotee of Art Deco, and he was the one who turned my brother onto the whole black and white and the Art Deco thing. And so that, that's how that happened. But anyway, so Tim was 4 years older than me. And when we were growing up, when I was in school, he would be in the next level, high school. When I was in high school, he was in college. So, he and I were on separate worlds, and, but when he started bringing home his college friends, they were going, let's take your sister, who's she? They would go, I'm taking her to the beach. Then he was like, who, what? So then all of a sudden I was like an asset, but then, we were tight. We were really tight. So, but then he was all of a sudden paying attention to what I was into. And I was just combing over everything that was in Manhattan. I thought Manhattan was the absolute mecca of the world, and there was no reason to live or be anywhere else. So
you grew up in New Jersey, right?
Yeah, in the beach town, in the Jersey Shore. Yeah.
Yeah. So Manhattan was the place to be.
Great place in the 60s. And a lot of people from everywhere else came to the beaches there. So I was aware of a lot of things being in New Jersey, being in the Jersey Shore. So, and it was just a bus ride. It was like an hour bus ride into the city. So there was Pratt Institute, like the oldest art school in New York, had like a Saturday high school art class. And my dad had arranged like an art teacher. This was when I was about 16. I got my first art teacher. And then she told me about the Pratt Institute. And so then on Saturdays, I would take the bus into Manhattan and go to this Pratt class. But the Pratt class was kind of like commercial art, it wasn't so deep. So, but I really, after the class was like an hour or something like that. And then I would roam around Manhattan, which is really what I wanted to do. So I never told my parents that I wasn't going to the class anymore. So, so then every Saturday I would go in, and all week long I would comb the papers and find out what the gallery openings were, what films were going to play. Times Square was where all the French New Wave films played. They all played on Times Square because they were considered racy.
Right, of course.
We had one like foreign film house in Asbury, and it played 8½. And, it was like the Catholic League of Decency. You did not go see that Fellini movie.
Scandal.
But, yeah. So I had a boyfriend. He said, what should we do? I said, we're going to go see 8½. Right. I didn't understand any of it when I saw it, but I sure loved it. So, but anyway, but then Tim, after school, he lived in Manhattan. So, but by that time I was at BU in art school. And so on the weekends, I would go to Manhattan because he had a roommate who, he was a model. He was a male model, and his name was Steve. And he worked for a lot of photographers. He knew the photographers. And there were the New York discos of the 60s the French discos. The first one was called L'Interdit. There was L'Interdit, and then there was Ondine. And Ondine was just incredible. And it was midtown on the east side. It was under the Manhattan Bridge. I remember that. So that's where I started to meet, all the authors would go there. I met Tennessee Williams. I danced with Tennessee Williams. I did the Frug. So I mean, it was all models, photographers, and writers. That was the group that was there. I saw the Doors there, the Rolling Stones. They were there, but they weren't playing there. But so there was Mick Jagger on the dance floor. Was like the size of, like half my living room was the size of the dance floor. So you were crushed up against Mick Jagger. Yeah. So there was this, Steve Sesnick's employer had a penthouse. It was either his agent or it was his employer. He was wealthy, and he was friends with Tennessee Williams. And he had a penthouse around the corner from Ondine. So after Ondine, we would all go, Lester Persky, we would go to Lester's penthouse. And all the freaks showed up there. So we're sitting around at this penthouse party. It was kind of boring, and the door opens, and in comes the Warhol group. And they had been in London, and they had just come back. And Gerard Malango walked in this black shirt with giant polka dots on it. And I thought, oh my God. And they headed straight for the kitchen. And so I went to the kitchen too, and spent the whole night hanging out with them. So Andy Warhol, he was, Fayette, we're gonna do a movie. Why don't you come? This was a Saturday night. He says, why don't you come to the factory tomorrow and you can be in my movie? And I said, yeah, be there. So by that time I was driving, and my dad, he would let me do anything. He was fabulous. My dad was fabulous. So I drove into Manhattan, drove to the factory. And I mean, at that point, I'm 17, and I had no idea what drugs were or anything like that. So I get to the loft, and Andy opens the door. He goes, oh, Fayette, come in. And it was so outrageous. I was like, so it was the first loft that had the tinfoil on the walls. And on one side, it was very long. And on one side, they were preparing screens for a show in Montreal of those 4 flowers. So there were all these guys screening, on one side, this whole operation was going on. And on the other side of the loft, there were all these couches, and all the freaks were hanging out on these couches and carrying on, screaming crazy. And so Andy gets 2 stools at like one end of the loft, and he said, you come sit here. He loved watching. That was his thing. He was a voyeur, really. So he put the stools down, and he goes, you sit right next to me here, and you can, ask me anything. You can ask me anything about anybody here. So what do you want to know? So I'm sitting there, and I said, well, who's that? And he goes, that's Marie Menken, because she was carrying on like crazy. And I said, why is she carrying on like that? And he goes, well, she's on speed. Do you know what that is?
It's almost like a twisted Sesame Street. Do you know what speed is? Letter S.
And I said, no. And he goes, well, have you ever had any diet pills? And I said, oh yeah, I have. My mom, of course, she was so fat phobic, and she goes, she was giving me the diet pills, which were so great. I'd take a diet pill and paint away, so I thought they were great for that. So I said, oh yeah. And he goes, well, that's speed. So that was that. But so then also Ronnie Tavel was there, and he was the writer, and they were doing films. I mean, I think they had just done Empire, because the flyer, they had it was like a public phone that was next to the door, and above the public phone was a flyer for Empire. Empire was just the Empire State Building, and then the sun sets and the lights come on. That's the big event in Empire, is when the lights come on.
Mm-hmm.
So what a concept. So he said, we're going to do the life story of Juanita Castro. And so that's the film that we did. And Ronnie Tavel, his idea was that he had the script, and people, I was Raoul, and we sat on, Marie Menken was in the front in a big overstuffed chair, and behind her were stools, and we all sat on these stools, and he would point to you and tell you what to say. And so then you had to say it. So it was that underground theater concept that he was doing. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, so we did that. So then I think a week later, he called me up, and that was my first year at BU. You had to be in the dorm as a freshman, and then you could live elsewhere. So that first year, so I'm in this girl's dorm, and the phone rings, and it's Andy. Well, hi, Fayette, this is Andy. And I'm thinking, these girls don't even know who I'm talking to, man. So he said, are you coming back? We want to shoot the film again. But I couldn't. I was having finals or some shit like that. And I said, yeah, come back. And anyway, so yeah. But he was a sweetheart. And my friend, Joseph Freeman, he was in high school at the time. And he loved Andy Warhol. He grew up in Brooklyn, and he wanted to interview Andy for the school paper. He was cute. So he went to the factory, and anybody could walk in. I mean, that was the thing. Andy Warhol, he was like an underground artist. It wasn't like he was untouchable or anything. It's quite the opposite. If you wanted to meet him, he was totally available, and he loved that. He was extremely social. And he would, whatever you wanted to do, it was cool. So Joey went up there, and he asked him if he could interview him for the school paper, and he did. And then he became his assistant. So after high school got out, he would go to Andy's house and wake him up and make sure he got to the factory by like 4:30 or 5 o'clock or something. And that became his job, for however. I mean, I think he got into Polaroids. So he has a whole collection of Polaroids, and I think, so he's putting them into a book right now.
I was going to say, I think this is going to be the next book. And we haven't talked about your book yet. Okay. So please, let's get into that. It's the 50th anniversary of the Cockettes explosion. Yeah. And I want to get into the title a bit. We know what the Cockettes is. Cockettes, acid drag, and sexual anarchy. Mm-hmm. So I think we kind of covered acid drag already. Tell me about sexual anarchy.
Well, we believed that if you loved someone, then you had sex with them. And it was really, there was like a moment in time where the door of androgyny opened wide, and any kind of sexual experience with each other, as long as you loved it, as long as it was not, you were not victimizing anyone, it was all consensual, and it was how you met someone, because a lot of people, you would meet someone and it would be kind of a non-verbal exchange, and you would get the vibe, all those cliches had a base in truth. So you would meet somebody, you would be really attracted to them, you would be kissing them, and then you would, what I mean? And after that, that's how you got to know someone, and after that, you would see if you wanted to go further with them and find out what they were like and actually have a deep conversation, which was considered more intimate, you know what I mean? Getting into their mind was—
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
The Cockette house was very much like that, and it was really like the sex house, because everybody that was there was totally turned on in that way, and the other thing was like the body consciousness in San Francisco. It was so elevated. It wasn't like anywhere else. Nothing was hidden. Everything was out in the open. And people were so, like, the sexual consciousness was so high that it was almost, when I first got there, I mean, people walking down the street, they would look you square in the eye. And, it was very out there. So it was almost like when I first got there, it was like intimidating already. It was so different. Even in New York, it wasn't like that, even among the freaks there, So, I mean, I was so into that scene in New York, but really this was like the advanced, then it was the advanced, class. So, yeah, I mean, you really, people's sexual awareness was almost the most important thing. And it definitely dictated how you dressed. And, the interaction was almost so prominent as far as the sexuality, and so positive and welcoming. There wasn't any, there was no judgment. I mean, it was a golden moment for sure when people were not judging each other. It was very giving and loving and sharing, and all of that was so perfect then. So
I think you summed it up kind of nicely. I wrote this down. People were allowed to live at the end of their imagination.
Yeah, and I thought that at the time. I even thought that when I got there. I thought, this is it. We're actually living where our imagination, as far as our imaginations can go. This is how it's being manifested right now. And I realized that at the time, and that's why I wanted to stay. I mean, I never left after I got there. I wasn't supposed to stay there, but my life totally changed, and many, many others. That's what happened. It was so life-changing because it was so advanced in a great way. I mean, it truly was, the Jefferson Airplane there. The first band was called the Great Society, and that's what it was. It really was the Great Society, man. And everybody was participating. And a lot of people, like the Cockette House, Jesus, everybody was naked walking around, or else, with naked with accessories, accessorized, but with your glittered penis. So people were intimidated. It was definitely, people either came and jumped in or they ran. So yeah, that's
I think that still happens. And how do we get back there, Fayette, please? What do we do?
The book is gonna crack it somehow.
I mean, because here's a quote from this is Midnight at the Palace that Pam Tent wrote, and because this is sort of like a counterpoint to your book. This is very text heavy. There aren't a lot of pictures in it. It's a great book, and your book is more like a coffee table book. Like it's
a photo book, yeah.
It's like luxurious. I saw the pictures. I mean, mine's on the way. So listeners, I will do an update when it comes, but I saw a bunch of pictures from various sources that people have looks gorgeous.
Thanks.
Like a coffee table book, like something that you're going to want to have out on your coffee table. Anyway, back to Pam Tent. So
stories. So her book is a lot of anecdotes from different members who remembered all the different stories. So her book is like one side, and that's why I wanted to do something else that was the visual story.
Yeah.
Because there were so many photographers that took pictures, because we were the first, we were the pioneers in that way. So we were photographically heavily covered.
I mean, obviously, this was a subject.
Yeah, definitely. And there's more. So I'm looking now to doing a deluxe edition, a bigger book, because I had to cut out 32 pages. It was too big. It came in at almost 400 pages, so we had to cut. But I want to do a deluxe edition with a DVD. So we'll see.
Yes. In 2002, the documentary came out.
Oh
And
yeah.
that was like a little bump for the sort of, zeitgeist in terms of the Cockettes. And now your book is coming out. But I still, I feel like people who know the Cockettes know, and we're obsessed, and we are like, "Ooh, did you see that bit that like Jalala made?" Or and we get very into it. But
Yeah.
then there's the other thing of people who've never heard of the Cockettes, which is mind-blowing to me, because this is like, if you're into, I want to say like Grace Jones or James St. James and the Club Kids or Lady Gaga, this is where we trace that back to in a very large way. So Pam wrote that New York fashion designer Marc Jacobs had found the inspiration for his 2004 spring line in images of I'm quoting, an obscure group of cross-dressers called the Cockettes. It was amusing to realize that some 30 years after our radical politics, sexual rebellion, and theatrical extravagance made us the poster children for San Francisco's thrilling counterculture, we would be remembered merely as a fashion footnote. How do you react to that?
Well, that was really, Marc Jacobs lived in San Francisco and was part of the Castro scene in the late 70s. I don't think he ever saw a show, but our visual language, a version of drag that was more expansive than just creating the other facade, which was popular then.
Just the gender flipping as opposed to the gender annihilating. Yeah.
So that really took hold in the Castro. And so he was a part of that scene. So he knew about the Cockettes and he was influenced by them. And then he became a professional fashion designer. So when he was looking to do something radical, so he gave, this was after the film came out, like 2 years later, he gave his whole design team copies of the film and said, watch this film and this is going to be where we're coming from. So the film really, there's something, the big door that opened to all the radical behavior really kind of shut by the time the 80s, the mid 80s, it went in a total other direction. And so people were not paying attention to what we had done. And we had only been together for 3 years. We didn't carry on after that, even though there were spin-off groups, like the Hot Peaches. There was groups in New York. There was groups all over that.
And I want to say the Ramones opened for the Whiz Kids, which was one of your
offshoot
groups.
Oh no, that was so Tomato and I, because Tomato formed the Whiz Kids in Seattle, and Tomato and I, we fell in love the summer before we went to New York. The Whiz Kids came to San Francisco. These groups like the Ridiculous Theater people, the John Waters people, the Whiz Kid people, whenever we would travel as a group to go see each other, and when they would we would go to the airport to greet them, and you know what I mean? And they had gotten in a van and drove to San Francisco to be with us. It was like this, the other stars were coming, because we had our own galaxy and there was certain groups that were in it and they were coming and it was a big deal. So they came in the summer of 71 and Tomato and I met each other and it was like totally, when you say a bolt from the blue, it was bang. And yeah, so we completely fell in love and had a big romance. And he wanted me to come to Seattle. So then in 72, when the group broke up, he said, oh, you have to come here right away. So then I went and spent the summer in Seattle. And when we got towards the fall, because when we were in New York, even though the opening night thing, whatever, but all the underground artists were really into it. And they wanted us to come back and perform in New York. So Tomato and I went back with Link. We went to New York and we started looking for small places to play. And we found a place to live. We were living in this tenement. It was a city-owned building it was off the Bowery. It was Bowery and 2nd Street. And we had the top floor. I mean, it was funky as hell, but hey, we were doing what we wanted. We carried on. We fucking carried on. So we were looking for small places to play. And right around the corner was this bar called Hilly's. And then all of a sudden, but it was closed. And all of a sudden it had a new awning that said CBGB's. And just like they show in the film, I think Hilly must have done this every day because it was the bums neighborhood. It was really, we were in another country called the Tramp, you know what I mean? That's where the hobos lived on the Bowery. And so, and then us, So Hilly was sweeping the street, and that's how we met him. And he showed us the club, and it had a stage. It was perfect. So we started doing shows there. And that's when, and then the band started coming in because he was divine. He really he was way into helping young culture, and whatever it was fine with him. And it was a beautiful hangout and welcoming to everyone. So we had this show that we did called Savage Voodoo Nuns. And then the bands would gradually come. And so, and it would be not just one play. I mean, there would be like, it would go on all night. Mm-hmm. So the Ramones, when we went, I think it was one of the Whiz Kids, Gorilla Rose, had gone that afternoon to CBGB's when the Ramones were doing a sound check. He wanted to check out who they were. And he came back and said, "You're never going to believe this group." So that's how we met the Ramones, because they opened for Savage Voodoo Nuns, yeah.
And you also did some costume production for it. Sorry?
Oh, I immediately brought Dee Dee home. Yeah. I did.
Bless your heart. This was before he made his rap album, though, right?
And then she asked him on the pan. We frequently shared. We shared.
That's part of the sexual anarchy. Yeah, and you also did. I just want to illustrate for our listeners who maybe like don't know, like how heavy your hand has been in terms of like the growing aesthetic of American culture. I mean, you were a costumer for Bette Midler when she was trying to break into Las Vegas.
Right.
What was that experience like? Like early Bette Midler. This is not Beaches Bette Midler. This is like Bathhouse Bette Midler trying to.
Or the Bathhouse, actually.
Yeah.
So this happened when we were in New York in 71, and when the show was playing, she came to the show. I think my brother brought her to the show because she was doing the same. They were into like 20s and 30s and 40s jazz and the vocal groups, and she was into the same kind of music. And there was a small group of musicians that were into that, and so they all knew each other. So Tim knew Bette, and he brought her to the Cockettes show. And then after the Cockettes show was over, I stayed in New York for a while because it was Christmas time, and so I stayed there. Christmas in New York, that's it.
Yeah. Especially if you're from there, it's like
really
untouchable. Yeah.
So I stayed there for Christmas and New Year's and everything, and so the group stayed at the Albert Hotel. But a friend of mine named Rose, she had a place on Perry Street in the West Village. And she was teaching. She was an art teacher at Monmouth College. And she said, "Why don't you stay in my apartment? I'm not there right now." So John Flowers and I stayed on Perry Street. And so then when everybody went home, I stayed, and I was still on Perry Street. So Tim brought her over one day, and we became fast friends, and we talked about everything. And then she said, well, the thing was Johnny Carson was mentoring her at the time. And he was bringing her on his show quite often. And he was going to be headlining at the Sahara in Vegas. And he asked her to be the opening act. And this was her first really big out there thing. So she was, she said, I don't, and at that time also, you have to remember, there was not like tour support like that happened in the record company, the great record company era of tour support, right?
Mm-hmm.
You the cocaine, right? So, and mega bucks, they were, showering you with everything. So she was on her own, and she said, I need help, and could you come and help me? I don't know what I'm going to wear. and can you bring some stuff? So I said, absolutely.
You packed up a suitcase full of coquetry.
I packed up the Cockette trunk. So we went back home, and we did shows after that. We did Journey to the Center of Uranus, and that's when Divine came, and she was in that show. And then we did the last version of Pearls after Link added a third act and more songs and everything.
This is Pearls over Shanghai?
Right, Pearls over Shanghai.
Mm-hmm.
So by that time, I had completely forgot about it. It's like, what? When? It was in April that we were supposed to go. So I get a phone call one day, and she said, hi, do you remember? You're going to come, right? You're still going to come, right? And I was like, oh, wow, okay, yeah, okay, yeah, So nobody went to Vegas at that time. I mean, not even your parents, really. It was not, it was a mob town, and it was showgirls, women with big hair, and the mob. And I mean, it was not someplace you went, certainly not as a hippie, man. So it was a big deal. So the Cockettes were all, Fayette is going to Vegas. Right. They were all over the moon about it. So at the time, when we got back, a few of us got a place. This was in the Castro on Belcher Street. And it was John Flowers, myself, Wally, I think Daniel was there. I mean, everybody was moving in and out of places. But so it was definitely John and Wally were there. And I think Daniel was there too. So that's where I was when I had to start getting this together to actually go to Vegas. Fucking A. So the significant feature about this is that quaaludes were invented, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there was a place around the corner from where we were living that was a clinic. And quaaludes, as so many fabulous drugs, was invented to get you off heroin. Right. But of course, when they realized that you got high, then it was illegal. God forbid, the euphoria. Oh no, the euphoria. God forbid you should feel good. So, and know it, you know what I mean? You're right. So, but meanwhile, this was when it was still legal. So everybody signed up, and we called it the Quaalude Clinic. But you had to sign up as a junkie. So I mean, who is going to use your real name and sign up and say you're an addict? I mean, nobody did that. So I had an alias, Betty Carlisle.
Betty Carlisle, perfect. Very sweet and innocent lady.
And I still had this like sweet face. I mean, I've been fooling them my entire life, honey, really. They all think, oh, she's so angelic, look how cute. Oh my God. No, baby, not up here, man. Yeah. So every night it became, people would cop at the Quaalude Clinic and then come to our house for like cocktail hour and get crazy high. So that's what was going on when I'm trying to all of a sudden figure out, what to do with this. And it was just impossible. So I just put everything into the Cockette trunk and shipped it air freight to Vegas. And this is an old steamer trunk, quite sizable, with the Cockettes spray painted on top in neon yellow. And that got shipped off to Vegas on Delta. It still had its Delta sticker on it. So Bette tells the story that she was already there. And all of a sudden, she was in the lobby, and her boyfriend was one of the musicians in the band. And they're standing at the desk, and this trunk comes through the lobby. And they went, what the fuck is that? And then they go to get in the elevator, and the trunk follows them into the elevator, and they get out of the elevator, and the trunk follows them down the hall and goes into the room with them. And then she realized what it was. So I was supposed to go there, I think on Thursday night. I can't quite remember, but I just, got too stoned and completely missed every flight. And then I also had a Foot Locker that I brought with me that had shoes. It was all shoes. And I had the Cockette press was in there, because by that time we were in a lot of magazines and we'd already been in New York. And I thought, I'm going to be in Vegas. Maybe we could get further. We all wanted to go to Paris. And I thought we could find somebody that can get us to Paris. So I brought all the press, and that was all in the Foot Locker. So Thursday, I completely missed the flight. Friday, and everybody was coming over at this point. Even more people were coming over because I was going to Vegas. It was so screamingly insane. And I had gotten like a barrel of Quaaludes to take with me under Betty Carlisle. And Wally made me a hat, like a big hat with, what Wally looked like. He wore everything all the time. So this hat was like a big sun hat that had flowers. It was wildly crazy. And Daniel, he rolled like 3 joints that were like stogies, they like cigars, these joints, and they were stuck in the hat. And he said, this will be fabulous. You get to the dressing room, you whip a joint out of your hat, you light it up and get everybody stoned, and that'll be your entrance. And I said, yeah. So I got off on Friday, and I got the last plane, which was at 2 a.m. And of course, they give you champagne on the flight. So I got to Vegas, and it was, like 3 a.m. in the morning. No one was in the airport. And, I get out of the airport, and I'm on the street with my Foot Locker and waiting for some kind of cab or something. And I realize I have to pee. So I totter back in. And, meanwhile, I didn't have any kind of straight, like whatever you want to call it, clothes at all. So I had picked what I considered the most, moderate dress that I had was like a 1930s. It was kind of gray and white, little chemise kind of 30s see-through dress. And I thought, they'll not notice me in this.
Yeah, it's moderate by Cockette standards in the universe that you had created.
So meanwhile, John, as I'm getting into the cab, John says, Fayette, don't wear the hat. And I'm like, I want to wear the hat. Don't wear the hat. So I totter back into the airport, and I come out of the bathroom, and this security guard just grabs my purse. And I was so stoned that I didn't know what to do. And that was illegal. And he opens the purse and he pulls out that bottle. And the next thing I know, I'm up in the office, and they're looking at my ID, and it's not the same name as on the bottle, whatever.
It's Betty Carlisle.
Mm-hmm. So bang, I'm in a police car, and the lights of Vegas, which were not very many at the time, are going in the opposite direction. And I'm weeping because when you're stoned and the picture changes drastically, what else? You burst into tears, man.
Absolutely.
So then I'm in jail, and I got one phone call, and I called Bette, and I said, you arrested me right out of the airport. I don't know what I'm going to do. We'll come get you. It's so straight here. It's just horrible. I can't believe it. We'll come get you right away. But they wouldn't let her. So I had to stay the night. So meanwhile, okay, so first I was in like a holding cell, and the Foot Locker is in front of the holding cell, and the cops open it up, and they're looking, I'm looking at them, and they're looking at the Cockette press. And some of it, there was one softcore porn magazine called Adam, right? And there we were in that, because Clay Gerdes put us in everything. And so they're looking at all that press, and I had like a moment of clarity, what they call, and I remembered the joints. And I thought,
Were you still wearing the hat?
I'm still wearing the hat.
Right.
So, right. So I backed into the cell and I took the hat off and I pulled out the joints, and there was like a lid in there rolled into 3 joints, and there was nothing else to do but so I ate them. So I ate the joints, and when they pulled me out of the cell, I was like picking the weed, you know, because this is Mexican weed full of stems, and you know, it's so funky, not like now. So pulling the leaves out of my teeth, and then I went to whatever the women's prison, but I don't remember a thing after that. I must have just, you know, they threw me on a bed. So then I woke up the next morning and I didn't know where I was because I was so stoned.
Yeah, you had eaten basically like an ounce of weed on top of whatever lewds you had taken up to this moment.
And champagne.
And that's the icing on the
Yeah, a little bit of fizzle there.
Yeah.
So it was fermenting. Yeah. So I woke up and it was this big room full of bunk beds, and I was the only one in there. And I thought I had been institutionalized, that I had finally flipped out, and they caught me, because that happened to a lot of people. You know, if you had gone a little too far and you were not among your own people, you know, if you were in the house, or, you know, people would, that was like the big danger then, was that you would be nabbed by the man and end up in a crazy house. And you had just, you know, you were just on a trip, but to them you were absolutely out of it, because the communists we protected each other. So if somebody was speechless and too zoned out, then you would bring them in and put them to bed or sit them in the corner, and you just stay right there until you come down, because you don't want to be out there. So, but meanwhile, here I was in fucking Vegas, and I thought, now it's happened, and I've been put in the nut house. And I looked out the window, and there was the desert and a wedding chapel. And I thought, now I'm hallucinating. Oh, this is really bad. So then I went out, there was a room, and there were other ladies there, and they were watching TV or playing checkers or something. And I sat down next to this like black lady, and you know, I just sat there, and she said, "What are you in here for, honey?" And I said, "Oh, well, drugs. You know, what about you?" And she said, "Well, I was with my boyfriend last night, and he was gambling, and he wouldn't stop, so I shot him." And I thought, oh my God, I'm in here with murderers. Great. Excellent. So, but then Bette came and got me out.
Yeah, I mean, just the juxtaposition of like, I'm in here with murderers, but don't worry, Bette Midler is going to come and bail me out of jail. It's so surreal.
And there was this guy named Bill Hennessy. He was a hairstylist, and he would travel with women that were on their own. I mean, if you read Joni Mitchell's biography, she talks about going on gigs, and she would go all by herself. And the guy that wanted to be her manager, she said, "Yeah, you can come, but you got to pay for the train or whatever yourself." And that's how it was. There was no, like, you know, nobody. So she had Bill Hennessy, and the two of them came and bailed me out. And I said, you know, I think I should just go right home, because this is not my town. And Bill said, no, let's just go have a drink. And so we went to Caesar's Palace and sat on the barge, you know, and I'm looking out at Caesar's Palace, and the barge, which was huge. Is it still there? The Cleopatra's barge? Oh, it was so cool. And it would have this big prow, you know, that was a sphinx, and it went way out into the casino, and it would bob up and down, and it was bobbing into the showgirls' big hair. Like they would be standing there, and this big thing was bobbing into their hair. And I thought, this place is even crazier than I thought it was. My God. So he said, listen, this is a mob town, you know, and we're having cocktails meanwhile. But also they took away my qualities. And I thought, this is bad, you know. And so I called home, you know, right away and said, John, you got to send me some more. But, you know, that never happened. It was too dangerous, you know. So Bill said, you know, they just want to know who you are. And now they know who you are. And besides, you're with Johnny Carson, and he's the man. And you can do whatever you want. And you can wear what you want. So by this time, I'm already getting little tips. You know, I had some. And I thought, this isn't so bad. So I stayed. And then Bette and I dove into the Cockettes trunk every day. And we got dressed up every day, pranced around the casino. And they would part for us, you know. And then I dressed her up even more for her show. And I would stand in the wings and watch her, and she would launch herself onto the stage all by herself. She was so tiny, and she occupied that entire huge space. And she was incredible, just incredible. I mean, I knew that she was going to be a big star, absolutely, because she could do what no one else could do. And, you know, her whole thing was so avant-garde and brilliant. And she was such a great singer. You know, I thought, wow, this is going to be fabulous. So Johnny Carson would stand behind me watching it, and I would turn around and look at him, and he was like, you know, he never spoke to me at all. And, you know, I never met him, not even once. He was, you know, off somewhere else. But anyway, so we stayed there a week. And a week in Vegas is like 10 years anywhere else, especially then. Yeah, it was pretty surreal. And also, one day, me and the band decided, you know, there were, off in the desert, there were horse ranches. So we thought, we're going to go horseback riding. Of course, we're drinking constantly. So we went off to this, and I didn't have anything like even remotely. So I had these zebra striped capri pants and my go-go boots. My go-go boots, which I adored. They were from New York. And so that's how, you know, we go to this horse thing, and we're waiting to get on the horses, and we're sitting in the lounge and getting more drunk. And then we get on the horses, and of course the horses don't want to go anywhere, you know. So, you know, I think I got thrown off the horse or something.
In your white go-go boots.
White go-go boots.
You also made wearable art for, I want to say, the Rolling Stones, Diana Ross.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I made these, it was right when vests were coming in. I think it was probably in the early 80s or something. I wanted to have like a small wearable art business, and I didn't quite know what to do. And my friend was doing jewelry, and she said, why don't you just come to the studio and hang out, and you'll think of something. So I went to her studio, and she was dyeing beads and making these beautiful necklaces of all these bright colored beads and things on them. But just prior to that, she had done jewelry with findings that are brass stamped findings of everything you can imagine, from lion's heads to occult to Egyptian. I mean, it was just everything. And so I looked at that, and I thought, you know, that would be fantastic all over a vest. So then, of course, I went to the Goodwill, where else? And there's, here in LA, there's, this is already here in LA, and there's a St. Vinny's that's the biggest one, and it's way downtown, like beyond downtown. And it had a room that had a lot of menswear. And I found this rack of about 20, at least 20 Victorian men's black vests. I mean, it was what I was looking for. Now that's what I want to say. That's the magic of thrift stores, flea markets. You cosmically send out the message of what you want, and then you find it and it appears. That has happened to me. I can't even tell you how many times. And I've seen it happen to my other friends too. I know I go with them to a thrift store, a flea market, and they'll be looking for, I know what they're looking for. And there it'll be. And it'll be something I've never seen before, but there it'll be just for them. And my feeling is that here we are on this planet, and there is a circle of items that flow around the planet like satellites. And that circle of items is constantly in motion, and you can call it. You know what I mean? And it will come to you. So I found these gorgeous, never worn Victorian black vests. And I never found them again, actually. You know, they're very hard to find, actually. So I decorated them with these findings. You know, I got, this friend of mine made a drill press for me. So it had a very tiny hole, and I would zip into these findings of all kinds. And I put them all over the vests. And my first customer was Maxfield's, which is this high-end designer store here in LA. And so they sold them to the Rolling Stones, and I did a hat for Diana Ross. And so I did berets with all the stuff on.
Did I read New Kids on the Block also?
Yeah, New Kids on the Block. And what was his name? He was a talk show host.
Arsenio Hall.
Arsenio Hall was on Time Magazine wearing one, right? And Ron Wood wore one, and there was a photograph of the Rolling Stones, and the photographer actually sent me the picture of the group, and with Ron Wood wearing the vest. So yeah, so I rode that pony right to the end of the line.
Yeah. Again, I mean, I just want to reiterate what I was saying before, like how heavy your hand has been in terms of like the American wearable art, you know, from
you don't think of that, but yeah, I guess.
Yeah, well, I'm telling you that.
I had my own label, and I felt like I'm in business.
Mm-hmm. How much of the authenticity, cultish authenticity of the Cockettes do you think informed the idea of real in Sylvester's big hit?
Oh my God. Silly. You know, we called him Silly. He was so dear. Oh my God, I loved him so much. Daniel was my stage partner, and he was living with John Rothermill on Market Street. And for a while, I stayed with him. And Sylvester was living there too. So I got to live with Sylvester for a time. And Sylvester was one of the greatest people I've ever met. He was so warm and loving. He was absolutely incredible. And it was Reggie who discovered Sylvester, because he was from LA, and he would go back and forth to LA. And he brought, he met Sylvester because Sylvester had a group. I mean, when he came out to his family, they threw him out, you know. I mean, and that was common. That was common because it was so unusual in a family, even if you were gay. First of all, you didn't come out in the family, but people were starting to come out in the late 60s and early 70s. They were starting to come out in their families, or just leave and come to San Francisco, or, you know, where they could actually have a life. But Sylvester, all the singers that he admired were female vocalists like Billie Holiday, and, you know, so he wanted to be that. And Reggie recognized that, and he said, well, you have to come with me because we have a group. And so he brought him right to the theater and right onto the stage, and he started to sing. And I mean, we were not talented in that way. We were all artists, but we were not as yet performers. You know, so
yeah, that really wasn't the point of a Cockettes show, though. Yeah.
Talent, yeah. So yeah, when what was it? Gore Vidal said, you know, having no talent is not enough. We thought, yes,
perfect.
Yeah. But Sylvester really did have talent. We were spellbound. And Peter Minton, who became a really important pianist, and he had a big band later on. I mean, the whole thing of what's called vintage, you know, there was no word for that before, but that became a big trend. And we certainly were pioneers in that one, in all mediums. So Peter Minton was way into the 20s jazz music. So he was played with Sylvester. And, you know, the stage, when we were doing a show, it was total madness. But when Peter would start to play a song and Sylvester would appear, the hush came over the audience and everybody stopped what they were doing. You know, there was madness backstage as well. I mean, it was crazy, fabulous crazy. And Sylvester would sing and everyone just soaked it up. It was just so gorgeous. So he was able to materialize his dream and live at the end of his imagination on the stage. And that was really the purpose of the Cockettes. Yeah.
And I think that those lyrics, like, you know, the Cockettes weren't real, they were mighty real.
Yes.
You know, and that seems like such a perfect, like, you know, encompassing of that idea.
Because once you became incarnated, as in freed up in the Cockettes, you never went back, you know? So he carried that whole thing throughout his entire career. And you can see footage of him when he talks about who he is. He talks about his full-on persona and that he's not hiding behind anything. You know, he brought that forward in everything. And even on these, you know, odd footage pops up everywhere where he's on some TV show and there he is talking about that, you know, about who he is and unashamedly. And there wasn't anybody doing that. And there's a rainbow that's appearing on your cheek, I want you to know.
Really? Yeah. Oh, I think there's like a...
there it is. Yeah, you have this like rainbow right on your cheek.
It must be, there's a crystal in my window. It must be hitting me, right? So I've kept you for so long. It's been so amazing, but I really, before I let you go, I just need you to tell me and the next generation of freaks after me and the next generation of freaks after them, like, how do we get mighty real? Please tell us.
Definitely more difficult now than it was then, because we were, you know, we were the youth movement and we were supported. Everybody was educated for one thing, and we were supported in doing radical things by the society because it was open, and then it shut down when they didn't like how radical it became. But there's nothing more powerful than the group consciousness. And whatever you seek to do, try to find a group. Because if you have a supportive group, there's no limit to what you can do. And I've met a lot of people that are contacting me now that live in communes or in groups that live in factories. This one guy that I did an interview for, I think it was called Echo magazine or something. And this was in London, and he lives in like a big loft where this whole group of artists live. And that's, I think it's even more difficult now to do anything on your own if you really want to do something that is out there, that is not supported by the people around you or even the society or anything. Find a group or create a group, because we became so much more powerful as a group than we were on an individual basis. It was our power for sure. And I think now a group consciousness is really important, because people who want to destroy us are in a very solid group. And so the people that want to create and expand the universe in a positive way need to be a solid group. It's definitely the saving grace.
Community is the key. Group consciousness.
Absolutely. Support. Yeah, loving support. Absolutely. Oh, that's right on your nose.
Just turn around. Let me end by saying happy fucking 75th birthday. Fayette, it's coming right up. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And that your legacy is persevering. Can you again tell us the name of your book, where people can get it?
The Cockettes, Acid, Drag, and Sexual Anarchy, 1969 to 1972. And if you want a signed copy, it's thecockettes.net. And then I'll send you a copy. And the UK, actually, it's $35 to the UK, but it's really more expensive to other parts of Europe. But I think it's coming out in stores in Europe this month, in June. it'll be available in June if you're in another country. But domestically, I have free shipping.
So people can go to thecockettes.net.
Right.
And can you give us your Instagram handle, and hopefully people will.
The Instagram. You know, I did the Instagram, and it said put your name, and I put my own name because this was really when Instagram was new, and I didn't even know that you were supposed to make a funny name, so I just put my name. So Instagram is under my name.
Yeah, and I'll put all of these links in the show notes and a bunch more links for our listeners.
I have a website too, just under FayetteHauser.com.
Perfect. And I think I saw the book for sale online. So
it's over 50 booksellers have it.
Yeah.
Amazon, certainly, Barnes and Noble, absolutely. And all these independent booksellers under, it's called bookshop.org, is a collection, a network of independent booksellers. So
perfect.
It's everywhere.
It is everywhere. And listeners, get it in your house. If you like Lady Gaga, trace that history. Know what you're talking about. You gotta love the Gaga. But I personally believe, and I hope our listeners will too, if not for the Cockettes, there would be no Lady Gaga.
Right.
And so, we like to learn our history around here. Our listeners are kind of history buffs. And this is something that if you don't know about the Cockettes, you are about to know. Thank you so much for it. This has been a dream come true talking to you. I can't even express what an amazing thrill this has been.
I'm so happy you called. Yeah.
Hey, anytime you want to talk, you call me up and we'll have another chat. Definitely keep me in your email rotation and keep us.
Yeah. And I mean, I really, the live events, I really wanted to do it. Yeah. But when I start to travel, when things open up, like a year from now, I'll let you know.
Absolutely. And you can come back on the show and hopefully you'll bring whatever you're doing to Montreal.
Oh my God, that would be great. I've never been to Montreal.
Oh, well, we love wearable art. There's actually, I am going to put a little note in my mind and try to make the universe come together on this, because there is a wearable art, small independent festival in Montreal called Wiggle.
Oh, wow.
And I think the last one I was at, Amanda Lepore was the special guest, so it's like, I'm going to put that message out into the universe that Fayette Hauser is going to bring some stuff to the Wearable Art Festival in Montreal called Wiggle. And let's pray that happens. But if not, keep me posted on everything you do. I want to know.
That sounds great.
Yeah. Oh, I've seen some amazing choreography, very avant-garde. Wow. Very avant-garde. Some of the most amazing moving costuming.
Also, the performance there too.
Oh, it is everything that you would love it.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah, as soon as you can travel, you come see me.
I will.
Thank you again so much, Fayette. I wish we could talk all night, but
I know. What time is it there?
It is 5:00. It's dinner time here. So lunchtime for you. And again, listeners, I'm going to put everything that I think needs to go there into the show notes, and links and articles about the Cockettes and about Fayette and about this amazing legacy that you are continuing. Thank you so much for making this book. I'm like drooling at the photos. I can't wait to smell it.
That's what people are telling me.
I love new book smell, and I just imagine that there's going to be so much magic in there and so much for me to learn that I haven't already unearthed.
Decorating, like I'm signing it. There's one page that just has the name in black, and it's a white page. So I'm signing it on that, and I'm starting to decorate those pages.
Of course you are.
Sitting here with that, so I thought, well, I'm going to decorate the page. So if you get it from me, you're getting a
yes, so reach out to Fayette if you want a custom decorated copy of this book. Amazing. Thank you so much, Fayette. It's been an honor.
Thank you very much for making the program, and send me the link.
You must be a witch.